Okay, when I read Chris Kenny's column in The Australian yesterday, and it was well written, but it actually made me talk out loud and say, get angry with you, Chris. Well, how can you be doing this? I thought, here's a bloke I like and respect whose judgment has so clearly been clouded by smoking ceremonies, he can't actually see what he's advocating for anymore. And he's actually advocating for what he condemns. Well, I wasn't going to give him a touch-up on this show without giving him the right of reply. So I'm delighted to say Chris Kenny is joining me now. Chris, welcome to the show. I'm really pleased you accepted this invitation because you know we have diametrically opposed views here. I've just got to ask you though, how can you reach a conclusion that the voice is only divisive because some people are opposed to it? I mean, it's circular and tortured logic in my view.
Well, it's pretty straightforward, Cory. Thanks for having me out here. I could have had a Sunday night by the fire watching you, but I thought I'd come out here and find out about your anger. You know, I sweat through the wee small hours and early in the morning to write my column for the Oz. I didn't know it would make a colleague like yourself angry. Look, the point about the divisiveness of this debate is that the No campaigners are saying day in, day out, this is divisive. This will divide Australia, right? Now, the question about that is, are these valid concerns? Can we demonstrate that they are validly concerned about dividing Australia? Because if they can, then that's a legitimate argument to make. Otherwise, it's just a tactic. Otherwise, they are only screaming division in order to defeat the voice. And this is where the No campaigners are undone by their own position. Because the No campaigners, not all of them, you might disagree with this, but the clear authority of the No campaign, that is the National Party and the Liberal Party, their position is this, Cory, and you know this. They say they support an Indigenous representative body, a voice, legislated under current constitutional provisions. In other words, legislated under the current race power. And they say that would be okay. Yeah, but they say an Indigenous representative body, a voice legislated under a new provision, would be divisive. Now, these two things can't be true. Either a representative body, a voice, Chris, is divisive, or it's not. Now, hang on a second. Let me finish, Cory. Just let me finish my point. A representative body based on indigeneity cannot be divisive, legislated under the race power, and not divisive, legislated under a new power, or vice versa. It does not make sense.
Okay, and here's the answer to that is the race power is there, and people like me and you have said it shouldn't be there, right? But it's necessary because there are circumstances where we've got to do things for Indigenous Australians, right, that otherwise are specifically for them. But what you're proposing is, and saying, hang on, it's not consistent to be able to legislate through the parliament, which we've been doing for others for a long time under the existing constitutional power. You're now prescribing within the Constitution a particular body which is only open to a certain select group of people based on race itself, right? Well, no one else can participate in it except this bunch of people, and they get to have a say over every piece of legislation that comes through the parliament before anyone else.
See, this is all the furfies lined up here. Well, first, these people are not treated as a group based on race. They are Indigenous Australians based on their cultural connection and their ancestry to this country. It's not about race. As you say, race is an outdated concept. We are all part of the human race.
What a nonsense.
No,
so anyone can identify. Anyone can identify as an Aboriginal and then be elected to this body. That's rubbish.
Cory,
the High Court has ruled already that people who have Aboriginal blood have certain rights already in this country.
Well, if you'd let me finish, I'll get to that. If you'd let me finish, mate, we'll get to that. Now, you want to characterise it as race. Most of us don't. Most of us see Indigenous Australians as Indigenous, and all people in this country and elsewhere have various ethnic and cultural backgrounds. To label it as race is really outdated, and I wish the race power wasn't there. But we do need a power in the federal government to have power for Indigenous affairs, and that's why we have Indigenous Affairs Ministers, Indigenous Affairs departments. That's what we did in the 1967 referendum, was stop excluding Indigenous people from that race power. We gave Canberra the power to make laws for Indigenous people. So we're always going to be able to do that for Indigenous people. We need to. They have certain rights under Mabo and cultural heritage provisions as well. But it comes back to this simple point, Cory. You cannot say that a voice legislated under the existing powers is not divisive, but a voice legislated under a new power would be. That is completely contradictory. And if the no case really said what they believed, if they really think a representative voice is divisive, then they would not say that they would legislate one. They would not put up with legislating one because on their own determination, it is divisive.
What we have already, Chris, though, is a history of legislative bodies being able to offer all sorts of advice to government, right? And some of those are racial bodies, as I would say them. Like we had ATSIC, which was a disaster, but we've got thousands of other Indigenous outfits that all can make a contribution to government. We've never had a suggestion that a constitutional amendment needed to be made to enshrine this. And that does add legal weight, it adds legal uncertainty, it adds the right of refusal. The government itself has said, or the Prime Minister has said, it would be a brave government that didn't acknowledge what they said. And if they're not consulted, it could go to the High Court.
We know we're having a referendum for a reason. We know that provision is new. That's why we're having a referendum. This is only an advisory body, so it can't tell the government, make the government do anything. It's only advisory. But that's the whole point of having the referendum. This goes back decades and decades and decades in the journey of this country on reconciliation, and we all support that. Most Australians support that. And the idea here is, how do we recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution? Everybody agreed on all sides of Parliament maybe 2 decades ago that should happen. And people, the left initially, were talking all about symbolism, just a little mention in the preamble or something. This is actually a conservative idea, saying, well, no, actually, if we're going to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution, let's do something practical with it. And there were claims to have all sorts of powers and a racial non-discrimination clause and all these sorts of things that could have really created some unintended legal consequences, some constitutional consequences. And this compromise of the voice is really to avoid that trouble. It's saying, actually, why don't we recognise Indigenous people in the Constitution and just say that from now on, when the federal government is making laws and policies about Indigenous people, it should listen to them. Not actually do what they say, not actually give any power to them, just listen to Indigenous Australians, let them have a say, a voice, an opinion on what the federal government's doing for them. I don't call that a special right or a special privilege. I don't call that division. I call that a fair go. I call that a fair go, trying to bring this country together and close the gap.
Okay, there is not one law that doesn't have an impact on Indigenous Australians in this country in one way, shape or form. So we're going to consult them on everything, and no one's consulting me or you
can't just get away
about
with
new
that.
laws coming forward before the Parliament gets to vote on it.
This is nonsense. This is the scare campaign. The government's not going to consult the voice on everything.
It's true.
The voice will make representations on issues that affect Indigenous people.
How do you know that?
Well, firstly, the legal
You're making it up as you go, Chris.
No, you're making it up
as you go because you cannot
hang on a second.
You cannot rule in and rule out. You cannot rule in and rule out what they're going to be consulted on.
Cory, thanks for having me on. It's nice to be able to hit back at some of this stuff, but I get to say something, then you can respond, because you've asked me about this. You used the word consult. The word consult is not in the Constitution, is not in the wording of this Constitution. It's make representations, right? So the voice can just say things to government. That's all it can do. There's no obligation on government to come and consult the voice. Now, the voice also is supposed to be making representations on issues that affect Indigenous people. Now, sure, the scare campaign says, oh, they'll tell the Reserve Bank what to do or some other, the police what to do. It's a nonsense. If the voice did that, they would make themselves irrelevant, because no one would listen to them on our foreign policy, on interest rates. It's an advisory role only.
I'm out of time.
Well, we'll do it again, Cory.
I'd love to do a whole show on this, but I hope so. I'm out of time, but I think you're speculating. You think I'm being alarmist. We've got lots to talk about. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.